Known for its sheer brutality, the Battle of Kohima is often called the Stalingrad of the East. This epic stand against the Japanese prevented a catastrophic invasion of India during World War II. In 1944, the Japanese 15th Army, led by Lieutenant General Renya Mutaguchi, launched Operation Yugo. Their objective was to capture the Imphal-Kohima region, opening the floodgates for a full-scale invasion of India. The Japanese succeeded in isolating Kohima and severing the vital road to Imphal, forcing the British Indian forces into a desperate and bloody defensive struggle. If the Japanese succeeded, they would sever Allied supply lines to China and shatter British control over India. Standing in the way of 15,000 Japanese troops was a battered and outnumbered British Indian garrison of about 2,500 men. These soldiers clung to their network of trenches, determined to hold the line at any cost. General William Slim, the leader of the Allied forces, faced an unimaginable challenge. He had to guide his men through some of the war's fiercest and most brutal close-quarter combat. As a relentless storm of Japanese artillery rained down on the beleaguered garrison, Slim and the Kent regiments prepared for the worst. They were on the brink of being overrun. As the assault began, the Japanese forces launched a massive thrust on Kohima, intending to crush the Allied defenders once and for all. The ensuing battle was violent, extraordinary, and outright strange, with the future of Southeast Asia being defined in a literal tennis match where grenades and bullets flew over the court instead of balls. War is hell, no matter where it's fought. However, there might not be a more horrifying place to wage war than Burma. One British officer called Burma, quote, "perfectly bloody, gorges, cliffs, mountains and dense forest, much of it spiny bamboo, whose spines, sharp as needles and hard as steel, are 3 to 10 inches long." The place seemed crafted to torment anyone who dared to cross its path. Standing 6 feet tall, razor-sharp kunai grass slashed at every step, while thorns and vines clawed at men's clothing, gear and skin. Dense bamboo thickets demanded to be hacked through both at the base and beneath their snarled leaves, carving out a brutal tunnel for the advancing troops. Its unforgiving climate, dense jungles and relentless monsoon rains turned the terrain into a muddy quagmire. The region was rife with diseases like malaria and dysentery, incapacitating many and adding strain to the already inadequate medical support. Logistical nightmares were common, as the lack of infrastructure meant supplies had to be arduously carried by porters or unreliably airdropped. Combat conditions were brutal, with guerrilla warfare and close-quarter fighting in the jungle's depths. As if that weren't enough, the place was plagued with insatiable giant mosquitoes, sandflies and ticks. There were also leeches, which, if pulled off improperly, left the head behind, producing the Naga sore. This monstrous ulcer, 5 or 6 inches wide, ate into the flesh and muscle and could take the life of a man who did not receive medical attention. General William Slim, a seasoned officer and World War I veteran, called the border area, quote, "those hellish jungle mountains." He was no stranger to fighting in horrible conditions. Slim served in the Gallipoli campaign and Mesopotamia during World War I, earning a reputation for bravery and leadership. By World War II, Slim had earned a reputation for his strategic brilliance and knack for rallying troops in the toughest situations. Prior to Kohima, he led the 14th Army in Burma, where he faced significant logistical and tactical challenges against the Japanese. Slim's strategic approach emphasized flexibility, mobility, and the importance of morale. However, his most valuable leadership skill was adapting his men to endure the nightmarish conditions in Burma. In the early days of 1944, the jungles of Burma simmered with tension as both Allied and Japanese forces prepared for a decisive year of combat. General Slim, at the helm of the British 14th Army, was quietly laying plans for an offensive against the Japanese, unaware that his adversary was about to make the first move. Lieutenant General Renya Mutaguchi, commander of the Japanese 15th Army, faced a precarious situation. The vital railroad that served as his army's lifeline stretched vulnerably through Burma, constantly threatened by daring raids from British Chindit units. To the north, the lumbering advance of General Vinegar Joe Stilwell's Chinese forces added to the pressure. Mutaguchi knew that the Chindits would return in force once the monsoon season ended, potentially severing his supply lines for good. Weighing his options, Mutaguchi made a bold decision. Rather than wait for the Allied hammer to fall, he would strike first, disrupting British supply lines, and perhaps even thrust into India, where he hoped to ignite an uprising among Indian nationalists who opposed British rule. His plan relied heavily on the Indian National Army, or INA, a force of former British Indian Army soldiers who had switched allegiance to the Japanese. Formed in 1942, the INA was a force of former Indian prisoners of war who had agreed to fight alongside the Japanese against the British Empire. The INA's aim was to liberate India from British rule with Japanese assistance. However, this initial formation faced several organizational and leadership issues, leading to its disbandment later that year. In early 1944, as the dry season began, the Japanese initiated a two-pronged offensive aimed at disrupting British defenses in Burma. The first prong, codenamed Hargo, began in February in the Arakan region, targeting British positions to divert their attention from more strategic areas. This offensive met fierce resistance around the admin box position, defended by British units, including the 2nd West Yorkshire Regiment and the 6th Dragoons, along with various support personnel. Despite being an ad hoc defense force, they held their ground against a full Japanese division, inflicting approximately 5,000 casualties. The battle at the admin box was both a tactical and strategic victory for the British, demonstrating their resilience and ability to hold critical positions. Hargo achieved its objective of drawing British reserves, but at a high cost, and set the stage for a larger Japanese operation, codenamed Yugo, aimed at deeper penetration into British-held territory and a larger confrontation in eastern India. Yet with the INA dismantled, taking over India would not be a straightforward affair. Following the tactical setback of Hargo, the Japanese High Command turned its focus to the larger and more ambitious operation known as Yugo. This offensive aimed to penetrate deep into British-held Assam and capture the strategically vital areas of Dimapur and Imphal. These locations were crucial because they lay on the critical railroad line east of India's Brahmaputra River, a key supply route for the British 14th Army. The Japanese believed that capturing these areas could force the British to retreat from the border regions and potentially ignite a larger Indian uprising against British rule. Lieutenant General Renya Mutaguchi, the architect of Yugo, envisioned a grand triumph that would see Japanese forces overrun eastern India and secure a significant foothold on the subcontinent. Mutaguchi dreamed of riding a white horse triumphantly through the streets of Delhi, symbolizing Japanese dominance. However, the reality of the situation was far more complex and challenging than his ambitions suggested. The Japanese plan involved hurling 100,000 men at Assam, focusing on the key areas of Dimapur and Imphal. Their strategy hinged on the belief that if these areas could be overrun, the British forces would have no choice but to withdraw, leaving eastern India vulnerable to Japanese control. However, this grand prize required overcoming significant obstacles, including the well-fortified hill station at Kohima. Kohima, perched 5,000 feet above sea level on a saddle between two mountain ridges, commanded the only road between Imphal and Dimapur. The Japanese recognized that capturing Kohima was essential to severing British supply lines and securing their advance into Assam. As such, Mutaguchi committed the entire 31st Division to this critical objective, hoping to swiftly capture the position and pave the way for further advances. The British, however, were acutely aware of Kohima's strategic importance. They understood that holding this position was crucial to preventing a Japanese breakthrough. The British prepared to defend their vital supply lines at all costs. Faced with the imminent threat of the Japanese Yugo offensive, British General William Slim crafted a defensive strategy that would exploit the terrain and maximize the capabilities of his forces. Understanding the logistical challenges posed by the rugged landscape of Assam and Burma, Slim decided to make his stand on the Imphal plain rather than engaging the Japanese in the dense, mountainous jungles, where supply lines could easily be severed. General Slim's strategic decision was rooted in the necessity of maintaining a reliable supply chain. He knew that the British and Indian forces would be at a severe disadvantage if they had to fight on terrain that favored the Japanese. The Imphal plain offered a more advantageous battlefield with its open spaces and better observation points. Here, Slim's forces could benefit from the support of the Royal Air Force and the United States Army Air Forces, which could provide critical supplies and air support. One of the key components of Slim's strategy was the establishment of airstrips and large drop zones on the Imphal plain. This allowed for continuous resupply operations, ensuring the British troops had the ammunition, food and medical supplies they needed to sustain prolonged engagements. The British and American transport aircraft flew in prodigious quantities of supplies, demonstrating a remarkable logistical feat. These airlift operations were vital, as the Japanese had effectively cut off the roadways north to the depots at Dimapur and west into India. General Slim's approach also emphasized the importance of maintaining strong defensive positions. By blocking the only road in the region leading west into India, Slim ensured that his forces could control the flow of the battle. The better observation and mobility on the plain allowed British fighter bombers and defensive firepower to dominate the battlefield. The RAF and USAF transport aircraft delivered over 14 million pounds of rations, 1 million gallons of fuel, and thousands of reinforcements while evacuating thousands of wounded soldiers. The onslaught began on March 8, 1944, with a large-scale Japanese assault on Imphal, the capital city of the Indian state of Manipur. The British forces held firm, bolstered by an extraordinary airlift of supplies. Despite the Japanese successfully severing the roads north to Dimapur and west into India, the airlift ensured that British troops at Imphal remained well supplied, a crucial factor in maintaining their defensive positions against relentless Japanese attacks. Meanwhile, the situation at neighboring Kohima was equally dire. Kohima quickly transformed into a critical battleground due to its strategic location commanding the road between Dimapur and Imphal. The Japanese, recognizing the importance of this position, launched relentless attacks against the small British garrison, which comprised various units, including the Royal West Kents, Indian troops, and local militia. The siege of Kohima saw some of the most intense and desperate fighting of the Burma campaign. The Japanese 31st Division, led by Lieutenant General Kotoku Sato, pressed hard against the defenders, aiming to capture the vital road and sever British supply lines. Despite being heavily outnumbered and facing constant shelling, the defenders of Kohima, supported by heroic efforts from the RAF and local Naga tribespeople, held their ground. The Nagas provided reliable intelligence and carried hundreds of wounded soldiers to safety through treacherous jungle terrain. The garrison of no more than 2,500 men was up against a Japanese force of more than 15,000 soldiers. The British had to rely on their trench system and defensive positions to hold the Japanese horde off. Night battles were a hallmark of the siege, with fierce hand-to-hand combat occurring at the Deputy Commissioner's bungalow, a site that became a centerpiece of the battle. Despite limited water and food, the garrison remained resolute, buoyed by acts of individual heroism and the support from artillery positioned at the brigade box in Jotsoma. The Japanese attacked relentlessly, often under the cover of darkness, with brutal close-quarters combat becoming the norm. The terrain was so twisted and chaotic that much of the fighting was settled by small units face-to-face with the enemy. Heroes emerged from this savage warfare. Lance Corporal John Harmon, a member of the West Kents, led his section with unmatched bravery. Single-handedly, he charged a Japanese machine gun position, obliterated the crew with a grenade, and hauled the captured gun back to his lines. But he didn't stop there. Advancing into a building housing enormous bread ovens, Harmon discovered the ovens were packed with Japanese soldiers. Racing back, he grabbed a box of grenades and systematically marched from one oven to the next. Pulling the pins and letting the safety levers fly for a few seconds, he hurled the grenades into each oven. Along the way, he captured 2 stunned prisoners, one of whom was an officer, and dragged them back to his lines, one under each arm. In the aftermath, 44 Japanese lost their lives in the bakery area, many falling to Harmon's relentless assault. But Harman's valor did not end there. The following day, he took on the Japanese alone, entrenching just 50 yards from his position. With covering fire from the section Bren gunner, Harman closed in on the enemy, taking 4 Japanese with his rifle and bayoneting a 5th. Standing tall and defiant, he returned to his position as his men yelled for him to run. Harman refused, whether out of sheer exhaustion or an unyielding refusal to flee from the enemy. Tragically, he was gunned down and mortally wounded before reaching safety. His comrades dragged him to their position and heard his final words, quote, "I got the lot. It was worth it." He passed within 5 minutes, earning the Victoria Cross posthumously, his country's highest award for bravery. At dusk on April 6th, the Japanese 58th Regiment unleashed a savage onslaught from the west, targeting the hill features known as DES and FSD. Waves of soldiers surged forward, leaving piles of corpses behind, yet managed to reach the bashas or supply huts. The West Kent counterattacked with ruthless efficiency, led by sappers wielding pole-mounted demolition charges. Men battled through infernos as the bashas burned, driving the Japanese back into a scene of utter carnage. Amid the chaos, the Deputy Commissioner's bungalow in Kohima descended into mayhem, its tennis court transforming into a hellish battleground. The British clung to one side, the Japanese the other, with grenades bouncing and exploding across the court each night. A British officer's makeshift V-shaped wooden barrier deflected Japanese grenades in the darkness, and the British found grim satisfaction in the whoomp of grenades detonating in Japanese positions. The waves of Japanese soldiers seemed endless. With each step, the Japanese 31st Division inched closer to the heart of Kohima. The defenders, parched and rationed to half a mug of water per day, fought with desperate tenacity. Aerial resupplies brought crucial ammunition, rations and water, but much fell beyond the garrison's reach. Despite exhaustion, the combat remained ferocious. The British, vastly outnumbered, fought with calculated cunning, while the Japanese leveraged their numbers for massive charges into British trenches. As the enemy surged forward, screaming and blowing bugles, British troops held their fire until the attackers were a mere 15 yards away, then mowed them down with rifle, machine gun and Bren gun fire. Any Japanese who breached the British lines were met with bayonets or whatever heavy objects were at hand. One soldier played dead throughout the day, then bolted across the tennis court to safety at nightfall. A West Kent Bren gunner, regaining consciousness, found a Japanese officer in his trench and took him out with his bare hands before resuming the fight. Another soldier shot 3 Japanese in rapid succession as they leaped into his trench. Lieutenant Colonel John Young, the senior doctor, braved enemy lines to organize care for the wounded. Leading a team of stretcher bearers, he retrieved 200 blankets from trucks outside the lines. Young and other doctors worked tirelessly, yet the situation remained dire. By the siege's end, 600 seriously wounded men lay in trenches, clutching a single round in their magazines to avoid capture by the Japanese. British troops manned crucial outposts to halt the relentless Japanese advance into India. Holding on to Kohima turned the tide against the Japanese offensive and cemented the legendary status of the heroic British stand. Despite the grim circumstances, moments of remarkable courage and resourcefulness helped maintain morale. On Easter Sunday, the colour sergeant in charge of rations braved heavy fire to deliver a surprisingly lavish meal to the troops. Even to soldiers mere yards from enemy lines, he managed to provide stew, potatoes, tea and sardines, apologising only for the absence of traditional pink eggs. The siege intensified as April wore on. By the 14th, reinforcements from the Dorset Regiment and Cameron Highlanders had linked up with the brigade at nearby Jotsoma. However, on April 17th, exhausted troops from the Assam Regiment and Assam Rifles lost a critical position at Kuki PK to a Japanese breakthrough. It seemed Japan could still overwhelm the area. In the face of this setback, the West Kents held firm even when completely isolated and depleted. They drew inspiration from men like Sergeant Major Haynes. Even after being blinded by a wound, Haynes continued to rally his troops until the very end, when he was shot. The Japanese assault ultimately faltered under relentless fire, the Banzai charges breaking before the West Kents like water upon rocks. Accurate mortar rounds executed by the reinforcing forces finally put an end to the Japanese offensive. The garrison's ordeal neared its end on April 18th. After such an extended campaign, the Japanese spearheads could not hold any longer. British artillery began pounding Japanese positions, followed by airstrikes from Hurricane fighter bombers. A relief force, including the 1st Punjabis and tank regiments, finally broke through. As trucks and ambulances arrived, the road to Kohima was reopened, and the beleaguered defenders were at last relieved. The British counter-offensive continued into the surrounding hills, but nature soon added to the challenges. May brought the monsoon, drenching the troops and turning the battlefield into a muddy quagmire. Nonetheless, the British pressed on, methodically driving General Sato's forces from their positions. Recognizing defeat, Sato ordered a retreat, leaving behind rear guards to slow the British advance. The entire campaign, from the siege of Kohima to the expulsion of Japanese forces from the area, lasted 64 grueling days. British and Indian forces suffered 4,000 casualties, while Japanese losses were estimated at twice that number. The victory at Kohima, coupled with the simultaneous success at Imphal, marked a turning point in the Burma campaign. This triumph for British and Indian forces signaled the beginning of the end for Japanese ambitions in the region, paving the way for the Allied reconquest of Burma